Imagine this. A white Ford Bronco is crawling down a California freeway. Helicopters roar overhead. Police cars trail behind. And 95 million people are glued to their TVs. It looks like a movie chase scene, but the man inside the Bronco isn't an actor. He's one of the most famous athletes in America. And the question everyone is asking is simple. Did O.J. Simpson murder his ex-wife? Or is he the most hated innocent man in history? For 2 hours, the entire country stops. Flights are delayed. Restaurants switch their TVs from the NBA Finals to the chase. People spill out of bars, staring through the glass. Inside the Bronco, O.J. holds a gun to his head, sobbing into a phone, promising he will kill himself if police don't back off. Outside, fans hang banners from bridges. Go O.J.! Some cheer, some cry. Some are horrified. Millions of strangers suddenly feel like they know this man personally, like they grew up with him. This is not just a crime story anymore. This is a national obsession. But to really understand how the trial of the century began, you have to go back. Back before the Bronco, before the blood on the walkway, before the gloves and the DNA and the shocking not guilty verdict. You have to meet Orenthal James Simpson the way America first met him. Not as a suspect, but as a hero. O.J. Simpson grew up in the projects of San Francisco, a skinny kid with bowed legs and asthma. He wasn't born into fame, he ran toward it. As a teenager, he found one thing that made people forget he was poor: speed. On the football field, he was a blur, cutting, spinning, outrunning everyone. At the University of Southern California, he turned into a legend. Crowds chanted his name. In 1968, he won the Heisman Trophy, college football's highest honor. Sports writers called him a once-in-a-generation athlete. Then came the NFL. Drafted first overall, O.J. became the superstar of the Buffalo Bills. In 1973, he rushed for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a record everyone thought was impossible. Broadcasters nicknamed him the Juice, and he played it up with a grin. Advertisers loved him. He did commercials for Hertz, sprinting through airports in a suit, charming old ladies and kids along the way. For many Americans, especially white Americans, he wasn't just a black athlete. He was the safe, friendly celebrity they welcomed into their living rooms. But the public never sees the whole picture. Away from the cameras, O.J.'s personal life was cracked with hairline fractures that would later shatter in the ugliest way possible. In 1977, O.J. met Nicole Brown, an 18-year-old waitress in Los Angeles. He was in his 30s, rich, famous, and still married to his first wife. Nicole was young, beautiful, and dazzled by the attention of a superstar. Soon, they were inseparable. By 1979, O.J. divorced his first wife. In 1985, he married Nicole in a fairy tale ceremony. They had 2 children. From the outside, they were the perfect L.A. couple. Mansion in Brentwood, nice cars, pool parties, glamorous friends. Magazine photos showed smiles, vacations, and matching outfits. Inside their home, the story was different. Neighbors heard screams. Police came to the house again and again for domestic violence calls. Officers wrote reports describing Nicole with bruises, swollen lips, terrified eyes. One time, she ran out of the house half-dressed, hiding in bushes and begging for help. When police arrived, they found O.J. furious, pacing, insisting it was just an argument. Nicole whispered to officers that he had hit her, that she thought he would kill her. And yet, every time, the pattern repeated. Police stepped back. Reports went nowhere, and O.J. walked away without serious consequences. Fame has a way of bending the rules. Nicole's diary, later described in court, painted a picture of a relationship that swung between charm and horror. O.J. could be sweet, loving, and playful with the kids one day, then jealous, controlling, and violent the next. Friends said she would show up with bruises and shrug them off. "I fell," she'd say. But behind closed doors, she told some of them she was scared of him. She believed that if she left, he might snap. In 1992, Nicole finally did it. She filed for divorce, telling the court irreconcilable differences. On paper, it sounded calm. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to escape. The divorce became messy and painful. There were custody battles, arguments over money, fights over who would get what. Yet even after the divorce was final, O.J. remained a constant presence. He would show up uninvited, call late at night, try to pull her back into his orbit. Sometimes they reconciled briefly holidays, family events, private dinners. Sometimes they screamed at each other in public. The separation did not cut the connection. It only frayed it. By June 1994, Nicole was trying to rebuild some kind of normal life. She had her own routine, dropping the kids at school, going to the gym, dinner with friends at her favorite restaurant, Mezzaluna. There were rumors she was dating again. There were also rumors that O.J. didn't like that at all. Friends remember Nicole saying she felt like she was being watched. Her dog would bark at nothing. She told one friend, "He's going to kill me one day, and he'll get away with it." At the time, it sounded like fear talking. Later, those words would feel like a prophecy. And then, everything exploded. On the night of the 12th of June 1994, Nicole had dinner at Mezzaluna with friends and family. It was a sunny Sunday in Los Angeles, and nothing about the evening seemed special or dangerous. She laughed. She hugged her kids. After dinner, she went home to her condo on Bundy Drive. O.J., meanwhile, was at his estate in Rockingham, planning to fly to Chicago later that night for a Hertz promotion. Around midnight, a neighbor walking a dog noticed something strange. Nicole's white Akita wandering alone, its fur stained with what looked like blood. The dog whined, tugging at its leash, trying to lead people somewhere. Curious and uneasy, the neighbor followed. What he found on the path to Nicole's condo would change American history. Nicole Brown Simpson lay in a pool of blood near her front steps, almost unrecognizable. Her throat had been slashed so deep, doctors later said it was nearly decapitation. Multiple stab wounds covered her body. Nearby, slumped against a fence, was 25-year-old Ron Goldman, a handsome waiter from Mezzaluna who had come by to return a pair of glasses Nicole's mother had left at the restaurant. He never made it back to his car. Both victims were barefoot. The scene was chaos and silence at the same time. Within hours, police officers arrived at O.J. Simpson's estate. They saw more than they expected. A white Ford Bronco parked outside with what looked like blood on the door, drops on the driveway, a dark trail leading toward the house, a broken hen door at the back. It was as if the crime scene had continued all the way from Bundy Drive to Rockingham. Detectives knocked. No answer. They jumped the wall, claiming they were worried someone else might be harmed inside. In the backyard, they found a bloody glove behind the guest house, the twin, they believed, of a glove found at the murder scene. They would later claim this glove tied O.J. directly to the killings. Defense attorneys would call it something else, a setup. When detectives finally reached O.J. by phone, he didn't sound like a man whose ex-wife had just been gruesomely murdered. He sounded dazed, detached, defensive. He claimed he'd been sleeping, then rushing to catch a flight to Chicago. He said he had no idea what happened, but when they saw him in person, they noticed something else. Cuts on his hand. He offered different stories about where they came from. The more he talked, the more suspicious he looked. The next day, the world learned that O.J. Simpson was not just a grieving ex-husband. He was the prime suspect in a double homicide. News vans swarmed his house. Reporters shouted questions. Helicopters hovered over the neighborhood. For many fans who grew up cheering for the juice, it felt like the sky had ripped open. Could their hero really have butchered the mother of his children? Could the smiling face from the Hertz commercials also be the face behind a throat sliced almost to the spine? Police planned an arrest. O.J. agreed to surrender peacefully. Instead, he disappeared. And within hours, that white Bronco appeared on TV screens across America, gliding down the freeway, as if carrying not just a fleeing suspect, but the broken image of a nation that had loved him. What really happened between O.J. and Nicole that night? How strong was the evidence, the DNA, the blood drops, the timeline? Did the LAPD build a solid case, or did they cut corners and create reasonable doubt? In the next part, the investigation goes under the microscope. The bloody glove, the famous detective, and the decisions that turned this case into the most controversial trial in modern American history. The Bronco chase is the moment everyone remembers. But before that live TV drama, detectives were already building a case that would either look rock solid or like a disaster, depending on who you ask. By the morning after the murders, the LAPD knew three things. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman had been brutally stabbed outside Nicole's condo, O.J. Simpson had a long, documented history of domestic violence against Nicole, and there was a trail of physical evidence that seemed to point straight at him. Officers had seen what looked like blood on the outside of his white Ford Bronco, on the driveway, and on the front door of his Rockingham estate. They had also found that bloody glove behind his guest house, the same brand and size as the one at the crime scene. To detectives, it was like someone had dropped breadcrumbs from Bundy Drive to OJ's backyard. But from the very beginning, the way they collected that evidence gave the defense ammunition. Detective Mark Furman, a tall, intense LAPD officer, became the face of the investigation. He arrived at Nicole's condo in the dark, early hours after the bodies were discovered. He saw the chaos. Blood everywhere, footprints, a knit cap, a glove, and a dog still whining, pulling its leash toward the bodies. It looked like a crime of rage up close, personal, messy. No gunfire from a distance. No careful professional hit. Whoever did this had been inches away from their victims. Furman already knew who Nicole was. He had responded to earlier domestic violence calls at her home. He had seen her bruises, heard her say she was afraid for her life. When he heard her name on the radio that night, one thought hit him immediately. Where is OJ? That thought, planted early, would later be used against him. The defense would say he never looked at any other suspect. He had decided in advance who the killer was. At Rockingham, the police pushed the limits. Instead of waiting for a warrant, they climbed over the wall, claiming they were worried someone inside might be injured. That decision, legally arguable but risky, let them enter the property, wander around in the dark, and discover key evidence before everything was documented properly. Defense attorneys would later pounce on that. If you break normal procedure at the very start, how can anyone trust what you say you found? The bloody glove behind the guest house became the single most famous piece of evidence in the case. According to Furman, he spotted a line of blood drops near OJ's Bronco, followed them around the property, and eventually shined his flashlight behind the guest house where he saw the glove lying in the dirt. It matched the one at the crime scene. Same brand, Eris isotoner. Same size, extra large, same dark, soaked leather. For the prosecution, this was the smoking gun in fabric form. For the defense, it was a red flag. Why is the same detective at both scenes, conveniently finding the one item that ties them together? Meanwhile, OJ was playing his own role, one that made him look guilty to some and hunted to others. He had flown to Chicago the night of the murders for a business trip. When police called to tell him Nicole was dead, witnesses say he sounded oddly flat, asking, "Who killed her?" but not breaking down. When officers later met him at his house, they noticed a cut on his left hand. At first, OJ said he didn't know how he got it. Then he said he cut it on a glass in his Chicago hotel room after hearing about Nicole's death. The story kept changing, tiny inconsistencies. But in a murder case, tiny things matter. As the lab started testing samples, the evidence pile grew. Blood was found at the crime scene, in OJ's Bronco, on his driveway, in his house, and on that glove. DNA tests, still relatively new for juries, in the mid-90 seconds, would later show that some of that blood matched Nicole, some matched Ron, and some matched OJ. The odds of those matches being from random people were in the millions or billions to one. On paper, it looked devastating. How do the victim's blood and your own blood end up mixed in your car and yard if you weren't there? But this was the LAPD in the early 1990 seconds, an institution already under fire after the Rodney King beating and the LA riots. Many Black Americans, and many skeptical white Americans too, did not trust the police, especially when it came to high-profile, racially charged cases. The question wasn't just, did OJ do it? It was also, can we trust the people saying he did? Inside the crime lab, mistakes piled up. Evidence swabs were stored improperly, sometimes left open. Lab techs moved items around without fresh gloves. Vials of blood were carried from place to place with no clear chain of custody. At one point, a tube of OJ's reference blood samples seemed to lose some volume between the time it was drawn and the time it arrived at the lab, raising ugly whispers. Did someone use his blood to salt the crime scene and frame him? Most scientists said contamination could explain irregularities, but once doubt is born, it rarely dies. As the media frenzy grew, the district attorney's office made its move. On the 17th of June 1994, prosecutors notified O.J. Simpson's lawyers that he would be charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and should surrender by a specific time. The plan was simple. He would walk into the station with his attorney, be quietly booked, and the system would show the world that no one, even a celebrity, was above the law. Instead, the deadline passed. O.J. was gone. His friend Al Cowlings called 911 from O.J.'s white Ford Bronco, voice shaking, telling police that O.J. was in the back seat with a gun to his head. Cowlings begged them not to approach aggressively, or O.J. would kill himself. The police backed off, following at a distance. The helicopters moved in. Within minutes, every major network cut away from regular programming to show the Bronco crawling along the freeway. Inside the car, according to later reports, O.J. was hysterical, crying, holding a framed picture of Nicole and the kids, apologizing to everyone and talking about ending his life. Outside, people stood on overpasses with signs, "Run, O.J. run," and "The juice is loose." Some threw fists in the air in support. Others stared in disbelief. The country split before a single piece of evidence had been presented in court. After the slow-motion chase ended at O.J.'s house, he was taken into custody. In the Bronco, police found more clues: a passport, a disguise kit, cash, and a gun. To the prosecution, it looked like a man about to flee the country. To the defense, it was a panicked, suicidal ex-husband who couldn't handle the death of the woman he supposedly still loved. From that moment on, the case stopped being a normal murder investigation. It became a television show. Every hearing, every motion, every leaked detail was broadcast and analyzed by talking heads. Prosecutors decided to try the case in downtown Los Angeles instead of the wider, more affluent Santa Monica area where the crimes occurred. That decision changed the jury pool and, some say, the verdict. The stage was set. On one side, the state of California, with DNA tests, blood drops, the glove, the Bronco, the history of abuse, and a mountain of physical evidence. On the other side, O.J. Simpson, the fallen hero, backed by a superstar legal team that would soon be known as the Dream Team. Their mission was not necessarily to prove O.J. innocent. Their job was to make 12 jurors say 3 words, "Not guilty," by turning every mistake, every sloppy lab note, and every hint of racism into reasonable doubt. And at the center of that strategy would stand one man, Detective Mark Foreman, the cop who found the glove, the cop with a secret that, once exposed, would shake the entire case and the country's trust in the LAPD. In the next part, the trial begins. You'll be inside the courtroom as the Dream Team shreds the prosecution's narrative. The bloody glove makes history, and a single line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," burns itself into American culture forever. Courtroom 103 inches downtown Los Angeles feels less like a room for justice and more like a movie set. Cameras buzz, sketch artists scribble, and every seat is packed. At the defense table, O.J. Simpson sits in a crisp suit, flanked by some of the most famous lawyers in America. Reporters have already given them a nickname, the Dream Team. Across the room, the prosecution organizes stacks of evidence, blood charts, photos, timelines, confident that they can turn a national hero into a convicted murderer. From day one, both sides know this trial is about more than who killed Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. It's about race, celebrity, police power, and whether Americans trust the system at all. The prosecution's story is simple. O.J. was an abusive ex-husband who snapped, drove over in a jealous rage, murdered Nicole and Ron, rushed home, and left a trail of blood and DNA that science can't ignore. The defense's story is very different. The LAPD, desperate to nail a famous black man, cut corners, contaminated evidence, and maybe even planted it. When opening statements begin, the jurors lean forward. Prosecutor Marcia Clark, with her tight curls and sharp gaze, walks them through the night of June 12. Nicole's dinner at Mezzaluna, Ron returning the glasses, the neighbor finding the bloody dog, the bodies by the gate, the cuts on O.J.'s hand, and the glove at his house. She promises the science will be overwhelming blood drops that match O.J., Nicole, and Ron with astronomical odds, footprints from a rare size 12 Bruno Magli shoe that O.J. was known to wear, hair and fibers tying him to the scene. If the jurors just follow the facts, she says, the conclusion is obvious. Then it's the defense's turn, and the tone of the entire trial shifts. Johnny Cochran, smooth, theatrical, and brilliant, steps up. He doesn't start with DNA. He doesn't start with the glove. He starts with history. He reminds the jury of years of LAPD scandals, of black citizens beaten and humiliated, of the Rodney King video and the riots that tore the city apart. He tells them this case isn't just about one man. It's about a system that has lied before and might be lying again. The police, he suggests, decided O.J. Simpson was guilty before they ever tested a drop of blood. And when the evidence didn't tell the story they wanted, they helped it along. At the center of that argument stands Detective Mark Fuhrman. When Fuhrman takes the stand, he looks every bit the classic TV cop, tall, serious, uniformed. At first, his testimony seems powerful. He describes arriving at the crime scene, seeing Nicole's body, following leads, and eventually climbing the wall at Rockingham and discovering the glove by the guest house. He insists he simply followed the evidence and did his duty. For a moment, it sounds convincing, but the defense has been waiting for this moment. They know something about Fuhrman the jury doesn't know yet. F. Lee Bailey, another star defense attorney, begins to cross-examine Fuhrman. The questions start slowly, then sharpen. Detective Fuhrman, have you ever used racist slurs to describe black people? Fuhrman denies it. Bailey pushes. The jurors watch him closely. Outside the courtroom, the defense has tapes hours of recordings in which Fuhrman uses the N word repeatedly, brags about harassing black suspects, and even talks about planting evidence. Once those tapes exist, it doesn't matter whether every single word is true or exaggerated for a writer. To the defense, they are dynamite, proof that the key detective can't be trusted. Later, when those tapes are played, the impact is nuclear. Jurors hear Fuhrman's voice dripping with hatred, describing himself as the kind of cop who could frame a suspect if he wanted to. The man who found the glove, the crucial link between O.J. and the murder scene, now looks like a liar with a racist agenda. When Fuhrman is recalled and asked again, under oath, if he ever used that slur in the past 10 years, he pleads the Fifth Amendment rather than answer. To many jurors, that silence screams louder than any confession. Suddenly, the prosecution's neat story doesn't feel so neat. If one detective lied about language, could he lie about evidence too? If the LAPD mishandled so many cases before, could they have mishandled this one? The defense doesn't have to prove that Fuhrman planted the glove. They just have to make maybe feel possible. In a criminal trial, maybe is all it takes to create reasonable doubt. Meanwhile, the science that should have been the prosecution's secret weapon starts to look fragile under attack. Defense experts question how the LAPD collected and stored the samples. They point out that some blood vials were stored warm instead of refrigerated, that evidence bags were opened and resealed, that some samples sat for hours in officers' pockets or cars before reaching the lab. They suggest that O.J.'s reference blood could have been used to top up stains at the scene. The prosecution insists the DNA results are too consistent and too strong to be an accident. But once the defense shows photographs of sloppy work and confusing lab notes, jurors start to wonder. Then comes the moment that will live forever in legal history, the glove demonstration. The prosecution believes this is their hammer blow. If the glove found at Rockingham matches the glove found at Bundy and it fits O.J.'s hand, the visual will seal the story. They have O.J. slip on a pair of latex gloves, then try to pull on the bloody leather glove in front of the jury, the cameras, and the world. It doesn't go the way they planned. O.J. struggles. He flexes his fingers, grimaces, and appears unable to pull the glove fully onto his hand. The jurors stare. The cameras zoom in. To millions of viewers, it looks like the glove is too small. Prosecutor Christopher Darden looks crushed. Defense lawyers exchange glances of disbelief. Did the state really just give them this gift? Later, the prosecution will argue that the glove had shrunk from being soaked in blood and frozen and thawed multiple times, that O.J. was wearing latex underneath, that he deliberately held his fingers wide to make it harder to pull on. All of that may be true, but trials aren't just about facts. They're about moments. And in that moment, the image is simple. The man accused of the murders trying on the glove the state says he wore, and it seemingly doesn't fit. Johnny Cochran seizes on it like a master showman. In closing arguments, he links it to a phrase that will echo for decades. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. It's catchy, almost childish, and devastatingly effective. It gives jurors a slogan, something easy to remember in the chaos of charts and testimonies and hours of conflicting expert opinions. Throughout the trial, cameras catch every flicker of O.J.'s face. Sometimes he looks heartbroken, tearing up when photos of Nicole are shown. Sometimes he looks bored or annoyed, scribbling notes, leaning over to whisper to his lawyers. For some viewers, he appears like a grieving father being destroyed by a racist system. For others, he looks like an actor playing the role of innocent man, hiding something dark behind his eyes. Outside, America is split down the middle. Polls show that many Black Americans are more likely to believe O.J. could be framed by racist cops, while many white Americans are more likely to see the evidence as overwhelming and the defense tactics as cheap tricks. Families argue in living rooms. Coworkers take sides at lunch. The case stops being just a question about one man's guilt and becomes a mirror reflecting all of the country's tensions. As the trial nears its end, both sides deliver their final blows. The prosecution reminds jurors of the bruises on Nicole, the 911 calls where she screams, "He's going to kill me!" They walk them through the timeline, the lack of an alibi, the blood, the footprints, the Bronco, the suicide note tone of O.J.'s words before the chase. They tell the jury that if O.J. were anyone else, they would have no hesitation calling him guilty. The defense answers with a different story. They don't just blame Foreman, they use him as a symbol. They argue that every flaw in the LAPD's work, every racist word on those tapes, every procedural mistake, is a reason not to trust the state with a man's life. They say the DNA is not a miracle of science but a fragile thing that can be contaminated and misunderstood. They say the glove could have been moved, the blood could have been mixed, the story could have been bent. When the lawyers finally sit down, the courtroom feels strangely empty. After months of testimony and wall-to-wall coverage, everything comes down to 12 strangers in a jury room, carrying not just evidence folders, but the weight of a nation's expectations. Behind closed doors, the jurors begin to talk. Some see a clear pattern of guilt. Some see a clear pattern of police failure. Some see both at once and still have to decide which matters more. The question they must answer isn't, "What do you feel?" but, "Are you sure beyond a reasonable doubt?" In the next part, that answer arrives. You'll walk into the jury room with them, feel the tension as the verdict is read, and see how one word, guilty or not, sent shockwaves through America and changed the way we talk about race, fame, and justice forever. Jurors file back into the courtroom like ghosts. The trial has lasted months, but the verdict arrives with shocking speed only about 4 hours of deliberation after closing arguments. That alone sends a tremor through the room. Reporters sharpen their pens. Lawyers tense in their seats. O.J. Simpson stands, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the 12 people who now control his fate. The clerk asks the foreperson if the jury has reached a verdict. "Yes, we have." The words hang in the air. Cameras zoom in on O.J.'s face, on Nicole's family clutching each other, on Ron Goldman's father staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. Millions of people around the world are watching live offices, classrooms, bars, living rooms, some recorded on videotape, knowing they're witnessing history. The clerk begins to read. "In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson." Time stretches. Hearts pound. Then, "We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder." For a second, the room doesn't breathe. Then everything explodes. At the defense table, O.J. gasps, shoulders shaking, mouthing "thank you" over and over. Johnny Cochran smiles wide, wraps him in a hug, eyes shining with triumph. Robert Shapiro, Robert Kardashian, F. Lee Bailey, they all seem stunned and relieved, as if they just pulled off a magic trick no one thought possible. Across the room, Nicole's sister collapses in tears. Ron Goldman's father stares in disbelief, his face twisted in raw rage and sorrow. To him, this isn't clever lawyering, it's his son's killer walking free. Outside, America splits on live TV. In many Black communities, crowds cheer, clap, and hug. For them, this is not just about O.J. It's about watching a Black man beat a system they believe has crushed them for generations. In many white communities, People shake their heads in shock, convinced a guilty man just escaped justice because he was rich, famous, and defended by superstars. The same verdict plays on two different screens in the same country. Polls taken after the trial showed just how deep the divide is. A large majority of white Americans say they believe O.J. was guilty. A large majority of black Americans say they believe he was framed, or at least that the prosecution failed to prove its case fairly. The trial becomes a kind of Rorschach test. What you see says as much about your own experiences and fears as it does about the evidence. Legally, the criminal case is over. But the story of O.J. Simpson is not even close to finished. Civil court is next. Unlike a criminal trial, where the state has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a civil case only requires a preponderance of evidence, more likely than not. Nicole's and Ron's families sue O.J. for wrongful death. This time, there are no TV cameras in the courtroom, no daily media circus. The burden is lighter, the atmosphere quieter, and the jury very different. The evidence is largely the same. Blood drops, DNA, Bruno Magli shoes, domestic violence history. But the tone shifts. Without the same racial tensions dominating every frame, without the relentless cameras, the case feels more focused. O.J. testifies, and under sharper civil questioning, his stories sound less convincing. Photos emerge of him wearing the same rare Bruno Magli shoes he once claimed he never owned. Experts re-explain the DNA, the statistics, the odds. The jury doesn't need to be absolutely sure. They just need to believe it's more likely than not that he did it. They do. In 1997, the civil jury finds O.J. Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. They hit him with a judgment of over $30 million. He doesn't go to prison, but financially, he's crushed. Much of his property is seized or shielded through complicated maneuvers. The Goldmans fight for years to collect. For them, it's not enough. No amount of money can replace a son. But the civil verdict is something the criminal trial didn't give them. A formal statement that, in the eyes of a court, O.J. bears responsibility for the deaths. Public opinion continues to shift. In the years after the trial, as more documentaries, books, and interviews come out, more people, including some who once cheered the acquittal, start to say quietly that they think he did it. Defense witnesses admit doubts. Jurors from the criminal trial give interviews explaining their decisions. Some say race played a role. Others insist it was all about the sloppy evidence and the reasonable doubt woven by the defense. The story keeps evolving, depending on who tells it. O.J.'s own life spirals. Exiled from the clean celebrity world he once ruled, he moves to Florida, plays golf, makes odd appearances, and lives off his NFL pension, which is hard to touch legally. He calls himself a victim of the media, insists in interviews that he loved Nicole and would never hurt her, and hence he's still looking for the real killer. Then, in 2007, he makes another catastrophic decision. In Las Vegas, O.J. leads a group of men into a hotel room to take back sports memorabilia he claims was stolen from him. Signed footballs, photos, personal items. The confrontation turns ugly. Some of the men have guns. The whole thing is recorded. It looks, sounds, and feels like a robbery. Nevadans don't see a framed hero this time. They see a man who thinks the rules don't apply to him. When he's tried for kidnapping and armed robbery, there is no dream team, no national wave of sympathy. He is convicted and sentenced to up to 33 years in prison. Many see it as delayed karma. If he walked on the murders, the universe caught up in Vegas. In 2017, after 9 years behind bars, he's granted parole. The board says he's a low risk to reoffend. Some Americans shrug. Others are furious all over again. For a man once cheered by millions, O.J. leaves prison as an almost ghostly figure. Famous, infamous, and strangely irrelevant. He now lives quietly, mostly out of the spotlight, occasionally posting online, occasionally trending when a new documentary drags the old wounds back into view. Today, when people look back at the O.J. Simpson saga, they don't see a simple crime story. They see domestic violence ignored until it exploded in blood. They see the power of celebrity shielding a man from consequences for years. They see a police department so damaged by racism and scandal that even when it might be right, many couldn't trust it. They see how a single case turned DNA evidence from something mysterious into a standard courtroom tool. And they see how a catchy rhyme, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," can outweigh a mountain of facts in the minds of a jury. Most of all, they see how one brutal night on a quiet Brentwood street exposed fractures running through an entire country. Race, wealth, media, justice. Ask 10 people today if O.J. Dryce did it, and you may still get 10 different answers. But no one disagrees about this. The story changed America, and every time a new true crime case hits the news, the ghost of the O.J. trial is there, whispering in the background, reminding us that in the courtroom, facts are powerful but stories are what decide fate.